So here's a fun thought exercise. If Oregon football stays in the PAC conference, whatever it becomes, is there a path to the playoff there? I'll tell you why the answer is yes, and I'll tell you a recruiting thought I kind of got to get off my mind. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster and lifelong Oregon Ducks fan. Thanks for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching the show. I appreciate all of you out there who have done so already. And if you ever want a question answered here on the show, you can do what Lorenzo Hayes did, which is hop in the YouTube comments, or you can tweet with the hashtag AskLODPod, or you DM me at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks are the Twitter handles. DM's wide open. You hop in there, ask me a question, get it answered right here on the show. A lot of you have done that. That's been taken off big time in the last few weeks, and I absolutely love it. Thank all of you. Lorenzo asks, how are the Ducks going to the playoff with what's left of the PAC? Now, this is assuming, of course, that no more conference realignment news comes about, but it's an interesting question to answer nonetheless, because the Big 12 and Pac-12 cut off their talks. If you missed yesterday's show, I'll give you a brief rundown. The Big 12 told the Pac-12, nope, we don't want to do a full merger, but they could still explore trying to poach the 6 teams that were initially reported when talks between the Big 12 and Pac-12 were kind of commencing from a fan and pundit standpoint. But these were official conference talks between George Kliavkoff and the commissioner of the Big 12. I don't know his name off the top of my head. I want to say Warren. Why don't we just look it up real quick here? But they were officially talking. Brett Yormark is the commissioner of the Big 12. So they were talking, and then the Big 12 said, nope, we're not going to do a full merger here. Maybe they'll go look at 6 teams. I don't know. But it leaves open the possibility that Oregon stays in whatever comes of the Pac-10 or Pac-12. And so Lorenzo wants to know, how are the Ducks going to the playoff with what's left of the PAC? Another thing that's important to consider here is even if you think, oh, well, once USC and UCLA are gone, and by the way, UCLA might be hitting some bumpy waters there. That's all I'll say. Not a legal expert. Takes a full deep dive to give you the full rundown on that. But you can go look it up and such. However, they both leave in 2024. So even if you think, oh, well, once they're gone, I mean, there's just no way the Ducks can get back to the college football playoff. The conference is too weak. Well, that gives us 2 seasons to get there. So pressure's on for Dan Lanning, I guess. But I think there would be a path to getting to the playoff there. On the whole, the value of USC and UCLA from a football standpoint, not talking about basketball, not talking about TV ratings or media market size or branding history, anything like that. Just looking at football here. I want to make that very, very clear for everybody so you don't think, people don't hop in the comments, oh my gosh, USC and UC, they've got a huge market. Yes, I know. We're just looking at football here. The overall value of USC and UCLA on the gridiron to the Pac-12 conference, I think is being overstated by a decent amount. Now, USC less so than UCLA, but since 2014, UCLA has not won 9 or more games. That is not a premier program in the football sense that you are losing if you're talking about having a conference that's still deep enough and strong enough to the point where wins matter enough in the eyes of the college football playoff committee to give you, legitimacy and give you the sort of ranking that you would need by picking up conference wins. I mean UCLA especially. I just think it's something that gets overlooked because people are jumping to, and rightfully so, because it's what's driving all this sort of stuff, the money in the TV markets. That's what has started all of this because I don't think it makes a lot of football sense for either school. But if you put San Diego State in the Pac-12 that just beat Utah, by the way, the reigning Pac-12 champs, might I remind you. It was early in the year, different team, but still, the fact that they were even playing them, they'll get another crack at them this year. I imagine the Utes get revenge at home. But if you add San Diego State to the Pac-12 for football and drop UCLA, and you look at the last decade or so for UCLA football, I really think San Diego State could put up something that is very comparable. San Diego State has beaten Pac-12 teams before. Fresno State has beaten Pac-12 teams before. It's not as if the Mountain West is a completely inept conference void of teams that are capable of competing at a Power 5 level. And the decade plus of football that UCLA just put together is not all that impressive. They've got a 9-win season, a couple 10 wins, and that's it. And it just hasn't been a whole, like, they've been in the top 25 for those seasons, and they were, there briefly a season ago with the early win over LSU, but then they faded a little bit as the year went on, finished solid at 8-4. I think they probably would have won that game against NC State, but then again, the Pac-12 doesn't win bowl games anymore, so you really don't know. So I think the value of them on the football field is, they just get lumped in with USC, like, oh, UCLA, USC, big brands. I'm like, well, they haven't been very good. UCLA has not. Now, USC is a little bit of a different story. However, it's worth pointing out that in the 2 years, for people saying, well, you need USC, you have to have USC, and to an extent, that is true. Because when they hired Lincoln Riley, my takeaway was, well, this is not all bad news because you're going to raise the conference profile and you won't have to have a big time non conference win in order to be in the college football playoff discussion, because that's another quality win you could add to your resume if you are actually able to beat the Trojans in the game that you play them in a given season. But in the 2 years that Oregon got closest to the college football playoff with Mario Cristobal was 2019, and then this past year in 2021. In 2019, USC went 8-5. Is beating a team on your schedule that ends up going 8-5 in the Pac-12 doing a ton for your conference legitimacy or your resume building in the eyes of the committee? I'm going to go with the answer is no. It's not nothing. It's a nice win. It's a solid road win, right? It is a good, solid road win. It was in 2019 with Herbert down there, but was it season changing? No. It was just a win that you needed to have and you ultimately got. In 2021, Oregon was 9-1, number 3 in the college football playoff. We controlled our own destiny to get there. Came up well short because we couldn't beat Utah. USC was 4-8. I bring all this up to say that I think the perception of the conference on the football field is taking a bigger hit, and the TV market viewership is going to take a bigger hit than the actual quality of the conference compared to what they've had. Now, your ceiling as a conference for the Pac 12 is certainly lower when you take out USC because of the addition of Lincoln Riley, who, if he goes there and wins 9, 10, 11 games a year, that's going to be something that was going to elevate the profile and will, at least in the short run, for the 2 years that the Trojans will remain in the Conference of Champions. But the question that Lorenzo is asking here is like, well, with what's left, how are they going to get in? They were very close, and they got in 2014, lest we forget, and might have in 2015 had Vernon Adams not been hurt as well, with a conference that didn't have a dominant USC, and that was kind of the beginning of the slide for UCLA. Like, neither one was a premier program in the conference in those years. What, like, USC was good in 2015, but they weren't running the conference. And so when you lose those teams and take them out, yes, it's weaker in a sense, but is it that much weaker to the point where it wouldn't be viewed as a Power 5 conference? I mean, look at the ACC. Aside from Clemson, what does the ACC have? They're hoping Miami can get back to where they're capable of being with Mario. And I mean, it's probably above where the Pac 10 would be if you didn't add anybody else, but there's a bunch of really bad teams in the ACC that don't have big brands, that haven't achieved a lot of big time things. I mean, Pitt won the ACC this past year, right? And they popped a little bit, and Clemson was down. But Clemson, for several years, has gotten to the college football playoff in a year where you look at the competition they're going up against in the ACC, and it hasn't been very strong. They go undefeated in that conference schedule, and it certainly helps. But you can't say that, well, there's just no path. Lorenzo, I'm not accusing you of saying that, but some people might theorize like, well, you just can't get in. The conference will be too weak. I don't think that's true at all. I mean, go look at the ACC when Clemson, has had an undefeated regular season, and compare that to what the Pac-10 would be, and they'd probably make it the Pac-12 if they're able to stay together. I think it's pretty comparable there. Nothing, however, is comparable to Built Bars, because Built Bars are actually amazing. And they keep me going on the golf course, right? I played earlier today because, of course, I did. That's why I record this later at night so that I can play golf earlier in the day. It's one of the benefits of this particular job that I have here. But I need fuel to keep me going on the golf course, and that is where I turn to Built Bar. The coconut brownie chunk puffs are here, and they are fantastic. I tried one the other day. Oh my gosh, it's incredible. Delicious coconut, rich sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing. Get to built.com to order your box of coconut brownie chunk built puffs right now. I know it's a mouthful, but once you take a bite, it's a delicious, glorious, chewy, sweet, flavorful mouthful. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. I really think the perception of the conference is taking a bigger hit just from a football perspective, right? I think basketball, you're losing a couple of really, really good schools. I mean, UCLA, they were what, preseason number 3 last year? USC gets in the tournament pretty often with Andy Enfield. Those are bigger losses there. But we're talking football right now because that is what is right around the corner. So the loss of the TV money, that's taken a bigger hit, I think, than the actual pedigree and depth of the conference. Like they just USC and UCLA, they might have been bringing a lot of viewership to the conference to help get the numbers up for other teams across the league because they're watching their schools play every team. The Washington States, the Oregons, and everybody else in the conference. They're helping in that sense. But USC and UCLA have not been the bell cow programs consistently since the Pac-12 started in the conference. When you're talking about winning a championship, they have not. They have not been that. It's not really arguable, I don't think. And is USC? And by the way, USC is still the most valuable West Coast football brand. They have the highest ceiling. If you're talking about West Coast football and the Pac 12 specifically being at its peak, it's when USC has been at its peak. You're in the LA market, you have a lot of celebrities. I mean, USC games back in the day, they were a really, really big deal. And even when Oregon was at its peak powers and Pete Carroll left and Chip Kelly came in, it still was not the same as it was big, it was awesome. I mean, I was there for it, but it was still not the same as when Pete Carroll was running the show out here on the west coast of USC. And even that's a viable comparison, I think, because USC went to 3 straight national championship games. They won a bunch of Rose Bowls and conference championships, and nobody was really that good. If you dominate your conference, if you're in a power, and remember, that was the Pac 10. That was pre Utah and Colorado. The Buffs haven't had it a lot, but boy, especially in the last 5 years or so, Utah certainly has. So I think you'd say the Pac conference now with 12 teams is stronger than it was when USC was dominating with 10. But USC was at the pinnacle of college football. They had Heisman Trophy winners. They're going to national championship games, and they were winning the Pac 12 championships, and that was enough. And so if Oregon ends up staying even in the Pac-10, if they perform at a high level, I mean, if you go undefeated in conference play, yeah, I think that gets you into the college football playoff if you win your conference championship game. I think even one loss could get you close to there. And again, I'll go back to because I think it's important. Oregon got to the playoff in 2014. USC was not at their peak. In 2015, Oregon had a good USC team there, and they were close. But again, Stanford was the team closest to getting in the college football playoff. And then in 2019, USC was 8-5. In 2021, USC was 4-8, and UCLA has been mediocre to way below average every single one of these years. So I think the conference still has enough respect. I'm not saying it's a lot. I'm not saying it's strong compared to the other conferences in the country. But the question that I'm answering here is there a path to the playoff for Oregon if they remain in whatever becomes of the Pacific Coast Conference? And the answer to that, I think, is yes. I mean, Cincinnati just got into the playoff going undefeated in their conference, right? Now, they also had a legitimate non conference win against Notre Dame. I'll touch on that in just a second here. But just so we're all understanding, the American Conference, which is certainly a rising group of 5 conference that is now about to get absolutely gutted by the Big 12. You got to feel bad for the American there. They're going to lose Cincy, Houston, and UCF. Those are your top schools right there. But that conference that Cincinnati to go undefeated through to get to the top 4 at the end of the season in the eyes of the committee had UCF, Houston, and the next school in the conference in 2021. Do you even know who it was? Do you know who the 4th place school was? in the American in 2021? Drum roll, please. It was East Carolina. I think they went 8-5, 5-3 in conference play. Like Tulsa is in there, Tulane is in there, and yes, that's how you pronounce it. You emphasize the two. I just do not agree with the idea. And again, Lorenzo, I'm not trying to come off mad at you or anything of the sorts, but I don't agree with the notion that like, oh well, there's no way you can get into the playoff if you stay in the Pac-10 or the Pac-12 if they were to expand with like San Diego State and somebody else like UNLV or Boise. Like I think you would absolutely have a good enough conference to be able to have that sort of path. Now, depending on your conference schedule there and the teams that you play or don't play in a given season, a could you need a non-conference win the way Cincinnati had Notre Dame? Yeah, but would you need it as badly as Cincinnati did? I think the answer is no, because that conference again had Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, all respectable top 25 caliber programs, and then there was a big time drop off there. A new look Pac-12 that's got Oregon, Utah, one of Washington or Stanford figuring it out, and then San Diego State with like a Boise in there. I think that's absolutely deeper than what you had in the American. So I think there's definitely a path there. It might be schedule dependent, which seems like an appropriate time to bring up the fact that college football non conference scheduling is ridiculous. Absolutely, positively ridiculous. I am looking right now at who Oregon is going to play in the coming years in football and non-conference games. Why do I know that? I don't want to know. It should be decided on a yearly basis so that you can assess as a program what the best game is. I mean, you look at your conference schedule, maybe you see, three tough road games and a tough home opponent depending on the status of certain college football programs, and you say, boy, a big time non-conference win is kind of what we need to get into the playoff discussion here. In other years, you maybe don't need that, so maybe you don't schedule a Big Ten game. Though, me personally, I'm a fan first, so I'm all about the smoke. I like the big games. I like that Oregon's playing Georgia this year. But like 2025, for instance, or no, 2024 would be the year that they leave. So 2024, Oregon's non-conference opponents are going to be Hawaii, Idaho, shout out to the Big Sky conference that I was recently working in, but Southern Utah has now moved to the WAC. And then Texas Tech. They've got a home and home in 23 and 24 with Texas Tech. So that's not a bad program to have on your non-conference slate, but you don't actually know you don't actually know what Texas Tech is going to become and whether or not it will be a good win. It could be. It's capable of being that. They've also got Boise State on the schedule for 2024. And then 2025, you've got Oklahoma State on there and Boise State. Oh, yikes. Oklahoma State and Boise State. That's nasty. And then 2026, Boise State again. I don't know why we love playing Boise. We always lose to them. But I guess we're going to go heavy there on the Boise State matchups and such. And then Oklahoma State again in 2026. So there are some quality opponents there that could certainly help. And I think that if you have, a Texas Tech team that's in the top 25 or Oklahoma State that's top 15, top 10 caliber, and you win a game like that, you could maybe afford a conference loss. I mean, look at Oregon this past year, beat Ohio State, lost to Stanford, still in the college football playoff discussion because they gave us one. And so would they give us one in the future? Maybe not. Maybe you'd have to go undefeated. But is there a path there to the playoff? The answer, I think, is yes. Okay, let's turn our attentions here to wrap up today's show with some recruiting talk. And I'll preface this by saying I'm not down on this staff at all on the recruiting trail. I'm very high on this staff on the recruiting trail. If you've been listening to me for a while, first of all, thank you for doing that. And second of all, because I love doing the show. And second of all, I'm going to continue to have high expectations for the staff because of what they've done already and also the history of all these guys on the recruiting trail at their previous stops and, what they've done so far. I mean, they haven't even been in for a full cycle, haven't even been in for a full calendar year. They've brought in the highest rated wide receiver in school history in Jurion Dickey. Might have been, I might have to double check that, but highest rated quarterback and the highest rated offensive lineman in school history. That's a pretty good start. That's a really, really, really good start. So I think when you look at the staff and the recruiting potential, it's very, very high, and I don't think that there's that there's reason for concern or anything. So I just want to put that out there first. Yeah, Troy Franklin had a 98.08 and composite rating for Jurion Dickey. Let me double check. Was yeah, it's a little lower at the moment. But anyway, so and all that stuff gets tossed around. It doesn't matter a ton in the grand scheme of things. But highest rated offensive lineman, highest rated quarterback commit in the history of the school. They're off to a really good start. However, there are a lot of names to watch out for. We've been discussing here on the show, and unfortunately, we do not get John Garcia on this week. He's on vacation. Can't believe the nerve of that guy. I'm just kidding. That because I'm going to be on vacation here in a couple weeks, and I was kind of on vacation the last couple weeks as well, but doing as many shows as I can. Names to watch out for in the coming weeks and months. Colton Vasek, four-star defensive end. He's committing soon. Don't have an exact date right there, but he put something out on Instagram saying he'd be committing soon, and he is considering Oregon. I think he's got it down to 5 schools, 5 or 6. Mateo Uyunglele is out there, 5-star edge from St. John Bosco in California. 5-star defensive lineman David Hicks, who's the top ranked uncommitted player in the class of 2023 right now. He's the number one defensive lineman. You got 5-star athlete slash edge player Samuel Impemba, which is a really cool name. He's got a crystal ball to Miami right now. We'll see if that ends up being the case. Just worth noting that Connerly had a number of crystal balls to USC, ended up choosing Oregon. So oftentimes they are correct, but they are not 100% correct. I almost said 1,000, but you can't actually be 1,000% correct. 4-star defensive lineman Terrence Green, who he himself has a crystal ball to Oregon, and 4-star offensive lineman Miles McVay. A guy that I would really like Oregon to get after, because you've got Connerly as a guy who's going to anchor your offensive line for the next couple years after this group that we see in 2022, which I expect to be very, very strong because they were last year and they bring back everybody but George Moore. Should be very good again. But Connerly is kind of your foundational piece there, and then you have to build out the rest of the offensive line. So I'd like to see some commits come along in that sense. And McVay is a really, really big guy. He's like 6'6", 350. He's a massive, massive dude. Samson Okunlola, 5-star offensive lineman, seems to be out of the picture. Never know. Maybe they'll pull a rabbit out of the hat there. But I mention all these names to say you got to get at least a couple of these guys because right now, with Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy there and their history recruiting defensive players and what Dan Lanning just did at Georgia, I've been really pleased with the secondary commitments they've gotten, no doubt. And part of being a head coach and part of the way we should evaluate a head coach is the staff you put together. And Dan Lanning has clearly put together a staff offensively that knows how to recruit, right? Kyler Casper, Ashton Kozart, Dante Dowdell, the guys they've had in the transfer portal, a lot of good things. Jurion Dickey, tons of positivity there on the offensive recruiting front. Defensively, I'm still waiting for that big defensive lineman commit because those are the guys that become kind of instant game wreckers the way Thibodeau was, and it hasn't happened yet. And I'm not saying I'm worried at this point in time. I'm just saying it has my attention that all the commits so far defensively have been in the secondary, which is great. I like the way the secondary is shaping up right now. You got Tyler Turner coming back there. You got Cole Martin, Cody DeCambra. Like there are just a lot of Caleb Presley. Second straight year, Oregon's gotten the top ranked player in the state of Washington. He's a top 100 player in the class of 2023. So a lot of really good names and gets there. But I seriously have my eye on these defensive linemen, those guys that I listed. You got to get at least one or two of them, and preferably with the expectations that I have for this staff, it'll be a little bit of a disappointment if there's not a 5-star defensive lineman or edge player in the class of 2023. And there's still some time. That early signing period is not till December. National Signing Day, of course, is February. So there's a lot of time there. But these guys are going off the board pretty fast, and there's only so many 5-stars in a class. And I think that's the sort of player that I expect Dan Lanning to be able to bring to Oregon. I mean, we saw Mario Cristobal do it, so it's certainly possible, and that's the pedigree on the recruiting trail that Dan Lanning brings. And I'm still waiting for that, right? If Mateo is somebody who commits to Oregon, then like okay, we're good. That's the first big time edge player or defensive lineman that you've got, but from a roster standpoint and I think a recruiting standpoint, Oregon is looking for that game wrecker on the interior of the defensive line, or on the edge as well, because I think that there's plenty of names and bodies there in the secondary. They're pretty much set there for the next couple of years. I mean, you'll have some transfers, obviously, but I think that they have a lot of depth and a lot of talent and potential in the secondary. The linebacking unit is pretty deep. They'll probably hit that a little bit later in the recruiting cycle, but again, a lot of youth and depth on the roster already. I think Devin Jackson, I think that guy's going to be the next stud linebacker for Oregon once Noah Sewell and Justin Flo go off to the NFL. But I'm still waiting on that one name, and that's like my biggest recruiting hesitation on the staff right now, to be all in and saying like, oh, they're hitting a home run in every facet. Like they've hit a lot of home runs. Dante Moore is a big time get. Jerion Dickey, Dante Dowdell, really really good commitments. Getting Caleb Presley, getting Cole Martin, getting Tyler Turner over, when he was down to Oregon, Oklahoma. These are all very notable, tangible recruiting wins for the Ducks here in the offseason. But at some point, that defensive lineman name has got to drop. Now, I don't have a total preference about which one it is. If it's Hicks, great. If it's Mateo, great. If it's Impemba, awesome. But of the guys that I listed off there with names like Terrence Green and Colton Vasek, you got to be able to get, I mean, certainly at least one, but really got to be able to get, I think, at least one 5-star and one 4-star from that class, and that'll put me at ease a little bit, because that's the one area where I'm still kind of, I'm not going to say on the fence about whether or not they can, but on the fence about whether or not they will, because it hasn't happened yet. But everybody's timeline is different, and sometimes, good things come to those who wait. We waited a long time to get a commitment from Josh Connerly, and that went pretty well. Hopefully, I'm saying the same sort of thing about a player like David Hicks or Mateo Uiagalelei here in the coming weeks on the show. I appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.